This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Big week in the SEC this week in college football. We have got Georgia at Ole Miss and Alabama at LSU, both on tap this weekend, the two respective road teams favored by less than a field goal as they take on some playoff hopefuls still in both those games. We're going to break down both those games, outline where you can find some betting value in those games, also talk some conference futures and preview the Holy War, BYU taking on Utah this weekend. We'll talk to Austin Swaim to get his thoughts on all of that and more for week number 11 in college football. Welcome on into Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast. My name is JimSannes. I am a managing editor for FanDuel Research. Joined here, as mentioned, by Austin Swaim. You can find him on X at ASwaim3. Find his work at FanDuel Research, where he is a senior editor for us. Austin, really fun week 11 on tap. How you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Jim. A little bit under the weather, but I can't let that stop this insane moving weekend in college football. It feels like, like moving day in golf tournaments. It feels like moving weekend because of all of the at-large spots. And like these SEC teams are kind of trying to get in order where maybe I'll dodge the conference championship game and actually make the playoff instead anyway. A couple of the ones we'll talk about. But it's a big week for me. I relocated to Lubbock and Colorado's in town, my alumni. I'm going to the game on Saturday, so the vibes couldn't be much higher around college football this week for me.
I was going to ask, do you have a prediction for us for CU taking on Texas Tech?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna bet it. I'm not gonna track it. I'm not gonna do anything. Sounds like Rosa's going with CU money line, which I think
that was my interpretation of her barking as well. Yes.
Yeah. Which is good. The Heart's got 100 units on CU money line as we go there, but I'm not going with a betting action. It's actually a little bit of a trappy line with 3.5 with Texas Tech. So I'm gonna stay away and just hope that we get the win.
Well, hopefully it's a great game. Hope you enjoy yourself there. Have some fun at the game, and hopefully we can get some other fun bets across the board here throughout the day for today. We're going to dig in, talk, as mentioned, some conference futures, because Austin mentioned it is moving week here in college football. I'm going to adapt that phrase myself as well. A lot of big games on tap. So let's take a look at conference futures and see if there are some numbers we want to snag before week 11 gets underway. Then we'll talk about 3 key games we like and Austin's favorite bets at FanDuel Sportsbook. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Wherever you get your podcasts, hit subscribe if you like what you hear. Give us a 5-star rating and review as well. For me, my first look at NFL Week 10 went up yesterday, breaking down 4 bets that I like, including one for Thursday night between the Bengals and the Ravens. Check that out on the Covering the Spread podcast feed, but also on our brand new YouTube page. You can find all of our Covering the Spread shows there live, and also NFL DFS show every Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern, live with Brandon Gadula tomorrow morning, breaking down our favorite DFS plays for week number 10 in the NFL. The NBA is back, and FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, wants you to catch all the action. And right now, FanDuel is giving everyone 3 months of NBA League Pass for free. All you have to do to catch every tip-off and buzzer beaters, place any $5 bet on the NBA to get 3 months of NBA League Pass courtesy of FanDuel. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. For Kansas, an affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in DC. After a 3-month free trial, the full price of League Pass will be automatically charged monthly. Cancel anytime. No refunds. Terms, restrictions, and embargoes apply. Limit 1 pass per customer. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, Austin, we are now into November, and we're getting a better idea of who the actual contenders are for each conference race. So when you look at the conference championships odds at FanDuel Sportsbook, any teams you want to snag prior to week 11?
Yeah, there were a few lines that when I perused the market this morning were intriguing. I think with Clemson losing last week, they dropped to plus 850 in the ACC market. They now don't control their own destiny. It's priced in there, but I do think they could beat Miami if they could somehow get into the dance Not sure if it's going to happen. I looked at the American, where it's interesting. Tulane minus 105 to win the American. That is pretty much a 2-horse race. Tulane, Army, probably going to be the conference championship game there. And Army may end up hosting it. But I would favor Tulane, so minus 105, interesting there. But I think the drama is around the Big 12. And I still feel like that when you asked me to look at this market, you were setting me up to be a homer to talk about my Colorado Buffaloes in the Big 12. Because to me, it's the most interesting Power 4 conference by a while. You can see with the odds that odds makers aren't quite sure. BYU plus 220, Iowa State plus 270, and then my Buffalo sitting at plus 300. But I have to be honest, I'm greatly surprised at the effectiveness of the Buffs here as I put on my analyst hat. They are top 65 on defense in passing and rushing yards per attempt allowed. They just aren't a pushover, whereas last year it was last one to score wins, and all of a sudden you've seen their dynamic offense be able to pull out to big leads against a UCF. They were able to come from behind and beat Baylor. I think this is a pivotal week where Colorado's odds will shift dramatically, or at least could, after this week because of two different events. First of all, Colorado minus 156 over Texas Tech today. If they can get through that, then they get true freshman quarterback Isaac Wilson in Utah next week at home. Probably sizable favorites in that one. And then bottom 50 defenses, Kansas, Oklahoma State to close out. So that bodes well for CU if they get through this sort of trap game in Lubbock. But then you also look at BYU favored in this market. They are sketchy 3.5-point favorites over Utah at Rice-Eccles Stadium. We'll talk about that game later, but there's a lot of movement that could take place where Colorado's actually favored in this market come Monday. So if I want to back them, if I think CU could run the table and BYU maybe stumble somewhere, or Iowa State has to lose, they have a couple of games against Cincinnati and Kansas State that are not easy when they struggle to defend the run. I think this is a good time to get CU if you want to do so, because it's probably only going to go down from here if they beat Texas Tech.
It's been very interesting to watch the betting markets around Colorado so far this year, because there's all this hype around them, obviously, and people talk about them a lot, but they haven't been overvalued in the betting market, at least based on what I've seen personally. I've wound up betting them a couple of times, which to me was a somewhat surprise, but it seems like the sentiment in the public has been so far against them. They've actually been undervalued at times, and it's possible we're seeing that here again as well. And you mentioned BYU in that game against Utah, which we'll talk about later on. That spread is tightened. It was 4.5 Monday, now down to 3.5. So yeah, I think there's at least a path for Colorado to sneak in there. And I don't think it's a total homer statement for you to be on them at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it comes down to it. Who do you think the best team in the Big 12 is? Who probably has the most successful profile for an NFL draft quarterback? It's probably Colorado, right? We know Travis Hunter's in the Heisman mix on both sides of the ball, doing pretty incredible things. Like, there's a legitimacy to CU, especially in a conference that maybe lacks the top end talent. I don't think CU would be faring very well in the SEC right now, but the Big 12 is different. And I think that's reflected in how well CU's played. Their only loss in conference play came after Travis Hunter got hurt against Kansas State, and that was still a one-possession game. So I've been impressed with my Buffs this year. It's my favorite team in the last 25 years, that's for darn sure. And we'll see if they can run the table and give themselves a chance to play in Dallas.
Well, now 2 reasons to root for them on a Saturday, both so you can enjoy the game, but also to hopefully get Colorado closer to cashing that Big 12. 3-1 to win the Big 10 or the Big 12 conference championship game right now. Let's talk about 3 fun games across Saturday, beginning with Georgia going on the road, taking on Ole Miss. Right now at FanDuel Sportsbook for this game, Georgia favored by 2.5. It is minus 115 to lay the 2.5 there. Total in this game is 54.5. And Georgia has looked really, really good this year. And they're favored on the road, but Jackson Dart, Ole Miss, kind of feisty so far. So can Georgia win on the road, or does Ole Miss pull off the upset here?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite sides I've had in college football this year. I love Ole Miss plus 112 as a short home underdog here. When you think about Trey Harris, who's their stud receiver, 5.25 yards per route run, target share north of 25%. The guy is a bona fide NFL stud. And all of a sudden, he goes out in the second half, and Jordan Watkins catches 5 touchdowns. They still put 63 on an Arkansas team that has been really scrappy against everyone else. They made them kind of look like a bottom feeder in the SEC. Look, they stumbled against Kentucky at home. That was obviously detrimental, and then an overtime loss in LSU, much more forgivable. But it is not crazy to think Ole Miss still has an at-large bid on the line here, especially if they get through and put a marquee win like Georgia on their resume. And look, the thing about Georgia you can't ignore right now, Carson Beck is crumbling a little bit before our eyes. 11 interceptions in his last 5 games, and not the best pass defenses in some of those games. Auburn, Mississippi State, we saw last week against Florida. These are not like lights out secondaries like Ole Miss has played at times this year. I think Ole Miss could potentially be the most explosive offense in college football. They play so fast. And then you look at their schedule after this, they just do have Florida and Mississippi State to go. So they run the table. They're 10-2. They are sitting out the SEC championship game most likely. They're probably in toward the back half of the at-large bid. So this is a massive game in Oxford, and I like Ole Miss to end up winning it.
What have you seen out of Jackson Dart so far this year? Because when I look at his numbers, obviously they've been insane. And that's not like a bulk perspective. It's an efficiency perspective. He's been unreal in that regard. So from a numbers perspective, Dart looks amazing. When you're watching him, do you kind of get the same vibes where the numbers are legit with what he's done?
Yeah, it's absolutely much more on his shoulders this year, and he's responded with an 86.4 QBR. In my anecdotal rankings, I don't have a model that called Jaden Daniels being a first ballot Hall of Famer like you, but with my anecdotal ratings, I think Jackson Dart's the QB3 in this quarterback class now when I've seen him put more on his plate, and he succeeded. 86.4 quarterback rating in the teeth of the SEC. I feel totally comfortable with this game on his shoulders, and it used to be Ole Miss protected him a little bit behind Quinshon Judkins, but now they will still run quite a bit with Ulysses Bentley, but with more on his shoulders, his efficiency has actually gotten better. It's been an impressive season, and he's the type of guy that I would much rather have at plus money here than Carson Beck, who is making questionable decisions that can really be costly against a team that can score like Ole Miss.
You just put the idea in my head of a Quinshon Judkins revenge game in the playoff. And like the idea of college football revenge games is nothing that I thought of a whole lot, but now I'm obsessed. So I hope we get that. But Austin is on Ole Miss money line plus 112 as they take on Georgia on Saturday. Second game wanted to discuss is Alabama at LSU right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. As mentioned before, Alabama minus 2.5. It's basically 3 because you're laying minus 124 to lay the 2.5 there. Total in this game is 58.5. Tough environment here. Alabama able to steady themselves with a shutout win over Mizzou last week. Obviously some quarterback issues for Mizzou in that game, but who you got winning this one, Austin? Alabama or LSU?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm playing a side specifically in this one. I'll say this. I trust Alabama's defense a lot more in a game that could come down to a single stop. They're 19th in opponent yards per play. LSU is 99th, which is a pretty sizable gap. So I'll pick Alabama to win, but I think it's probably right around this minus 150, 60%-ish implied that FanDuel is putting out there. Instead, I think I prefer a bet on Alabama's team total over 30.5 points. So sitting minus 120 when I checked earlier, because when you look at that, LSU is 99th against the pass. They're 44th against the rush. But Jalen Milroe, I can say it right now, my prop column on FanDuel Sportsbook on Friday, I'm going to have Jalen Milroe passing and rushing yards over in this game environment because I think Nussmeier can keep pace a little bit. And Alabama is a little bit like what you get with Baltimore in the NFL. I know that's such a stretch to say that he's as good as Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, but it's a different type of running game that Milroe and then Jam Miller can provide. And that's a tough matchup. So LSU, even though they check out well against some traditional run games, I think Milroe can still have success running the ball here. I don't trust LSU's defense as far as I can throw it. Like, I'm a little bit ambiguous on how Nussmeier and LSU keep up here, which I considered the full game over. It is at home for them, which helps, but Alabama 19th in opponent yards per attempt through the air. I am a little unsure there, so I think I'm just going to stay with Alabama's team total. You get a key number of 31 if they end up getting to that mark, 4 touchdowns and a field goal. So this is a good spot where I project Alabama to probably encroach 40 points in an up-tempo game.
All right, as you mentioned, that Alabama team total over 30.5, minus 120 right now, FanDuel Sportsbook for this game. That full game total, as you mentioned, 58.5. But like you said, if you are worried a bit about LSU keeping pace, we trust Nussmeier in general, but that is still a lofty locked number, 58.5. So going with the Alabama team total instead, 30.5 over is minus 120. All right, let's finish up by talking about the Holy War. It is BYU against Utah this weekend. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook, BYU favored by 3.5. They are minus 118 at the 3.5. Total in this game is 40.5. That has come down a couple points since Monday as well. So a lot of movement in this game, and it makes sense because BYU is a bizarre team. So Austin, can BYU get the win here on the road, or does Utah get the upset over their rivals?
Yeah, I definitely think that this line is very sketchy, especially when you talk about how this line has moved. You mentioned it was 4.5 Monday, and now it's come down to 3.5 a little bit. It's really odd that this is moving toward a team that hasn't scored more than 14 offensive points in the last 3 weeks, right? But when you think about the environment there, I mentioned Rice-Eccles Stadium. It's a weirdly tough place to play. Utah is still a really top-level defense. They're 31st in opponent yards per play. And I don't know how much I buy this undefeated BYU team. They needed a late, last-minute long pass to squeak by a very poor Oklahoma State team at home. They won by 3 against SMU, which is a win that has aged particularly well. I don't know how much I trust Parker Retzlaff on the road here. And I think that I'm going with the under 40.5 here because, like I said, Wilson has struggled to score. BYU, a top 10 pass defense in their own right. But then at the same time, I'm not sure that BYU is going to pull away in this game. So I think it's going to be weird. It's going to be ugly. And that could mean that one of these teams is sweating late. And it could be the type of game that opens the door for either Iowa State or Colorado in the Big 12.
I do respect your Xfinity Series knowledge with Parker Retzlaff in there, with Jake Retzlaff being the BYU quarterback. But I would make the same mistake personally as someone who has watched a lot of the Xfinity Series and has lost some money on Parker Retzlaff this year. Sure. Our goal is we don't lose money on Jake Retzlaff as well, because if Jake Retzlaff goes off, that total could be pretty dicey at 40.5. But as you said, good Utah defense. The only thing that I like about this, Austin, with the total here is that got a couple of paths towards the under, because it could be that it's just a low scoring game where Utah keeps BYU in check. Or if Utah's offense struggles, that's also okay for you. You mentioned how much they haven't put up a lot of points recently. That could also be a good thing for you. So I think that that's what's enticing, is there are a couple paths to that bet cashing.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Okay. So we're liking the under there, 40.5 minus 110 for BYU taking on Utah. So let's open up the board for you here, Austin. Looking across the entire slate for college football in week number 11, where else is seeing value for this week?
Yeah, I love a couple of lines this week. First, I'm looking in the ACC. Clemson, I mentioned, coming off a tough bounce. You know, they did not have a lot of success against Louisville. They now will no longer control their destiny here. I'm actually looking at the total of this game. I love under 53.5 points when these guys have consistently told us who they are. They struggle to put up points on bottom half defenses in FBS. Yeah, when they're facing good units. Clemson only scored 3 points against Georgia. They only scored 21 against Louisville, which typically Louisville doesn't even typically win on that side of the ball. They are just a top half defense in FBS. And then Virginia Tech held under 23 points against both Rutgers and Georgia Tech. So when these are arguably facing their toughest defensive matchup, Clemson probably second toughest to Georgia, I don't expect that they're going to score. And both teams here are outside of the top 40 in seconds per play as well. I fully expected this total to be 48.5. So sitting at 53.5, I see a lot of value in the under here, especially on the road. Maybe Clemson a little bit stronger on offense. That kind of evens it out a little bit. When Kyra Drones, he struggled throwing the ball efficiently against top shelf defenses as well. So I can envision a much uglier score than this one indicates.
Yeah, 53.5, the number for that Clemson versus Virginia Tech game. Under is minus 110. Any other numbers stand out to you for week number 11?
Yeah, so way back in March, you were gone and I was filling in for you. I gave out Houston over 4.5 wins at plus 138. It cashes if they get this one against Arizona this week. I am not hedging as much as I am doubling down against this struggling Wildcats team. Ex-Tulane head coach Willie Fritz here is a guy, that's why I wanted to buy into this program. And look, it wasn't working early in the season with Donovan Smith at quarterback, but they switched to sophomore Zeon Chris 4 games ago. They're 3-1 in those 4 games, and they're up to 21.3 points per game instead of 11.8. This team was unwatchable on offense. Like, they struggled to get a first down at all against UNLV in their opener. Chris has improved that dramatically, and they play real defense. They're 45th in opponent yards per play. Arizona's 102nd, and UA just lost to West Virginia's backup quarterback. They're 1-4 in conference play. Their only win over the aforementioned Isaac Wilson and this Utah team that's struggling to score. I don't think Arizona's very good at all, and Houston has some real momentum since switching QBs. I think they're a better team. The environment with Arizona doesn't really scare me either. My good friend Matt Tanner likes to say, keep the darn points. I will keep the darn points. I'm going to take the money line. Go Cougs.
Okay, plus 122 for Houston in this game, both for the win in this game, but also to cash over 3.5 wins for Houston this year. Again, we need to double up on the happiness for this week in college football. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. Big thank you once again to Austin Swaim for joining me here today, breaking down your thoughts on week 11. Austin, I appreciate the time as always. Good luck to you in week 11, but also have fun at the Colorado-Texas Tech game. Enjoy yourself, and we'll talk to you here once again soon.
We'll report back. It could be full-blown devastation, but I'll let you know next time.
I'm going to go optimistic here. Go Buffs. You can find Austin on X at aswam3. I'm on X at JimSannes. You can find FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Big thank you to our YouTube producer, Justin Lane, for his work on the video side of things. Thank you, Justin, as always. And thanks to all of you for tuning in back once again on the Covering the Spread side of things tomorrow, NFL week number 10 best bets. On the YouTube side of things tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern, breaking down the best NFL DFS plays with myself and Brandon Gadula. We'll talk to all of you then. This has been Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast.